This presentation is my literature review for the family that 3 generations of the family that I met with to see if I could find any issues or themes within their family and then research accordingly. I worked with a family that I used an unusual definition for 3 generations because the parents in the family, the eldest level of parents, are deceased. So right now the family only has 2 generations living. However, I'm looking at my diagram right now. However, there are 4 sisters who are 14 years apart in age. So between the oldest and the youngest, there's actually fewer years than there are in my own family, where my father's youngest brother is actually only 4 years older than me. So there's the same age difference between him as there is between my sister and I. So I'm not so much focusing on the time being the layers of the family, I should say, iterations of the family being my definition of a generation, but I am focusing on different social environments, different settings that the family was in at the time, and different lived experiences. And for these 2 sisters, one was basically away at college almost by the time the youngest daughter was able to do things independently in the house. So and that definition of family and generations of a family is actually coming from a social work definition, which of course I'll be citing. So, but it's that lived experience, and the lived experience, the environment. The family was also in a very different financial situation at that time as well. So they very much had different experiences. So I have the 2 sisters, and then I also have the youngest child of the youngest sister, who just turned 18. So there's a pretty big spread in ages. It was very interesting to me when we were looking at family members, because the question was asked to define, 3 generations of your family. Who are 3 generations who's in your family? And the 2 sisters listed all of the same people, and actually fairly similar relationships between the people, with some significant things that we'll talk about a little later. But the youngest child had a very, very different definition of who the people in her family were. There's a part of me that wonders if it's the way that the question was asked, if I would have gotten more similar answers if I had said, who are your relatives, as opposed to who are your family. There are multiple research sources, that are showing that this younger generation tends to define who their family members are separately from who their relatives are. And family tend to be people that have an immediate and direct influence on your life. However, I will say that for her mother and her mother's sister, there was also a much closer connection between cousins, between aunts and uncles, just a lot more. It's kind of curious to me in that sense. So the first thing I noticed is we have a distinct difference in how family members are defined. The second piece that I noticed is that we also have, this family is Jewish. The mother and father that are the first generation in this family, they he was raised Orthodox, the mom was raised Reform, and when they got married, she wanted to keep to raise the family in the Orthodox tradition, and Dad said no. He didn't want to deal with that, so she deferred to him. They had 4 daughters through the course of their marriage. Each of the daughters, with the exception of the youngest, were all also drawn into the Jewish faith. It was very important for them growing up, and it was also very important for them to communicate that faith to their families, to their own children. The youngest child, not so much. She pulled away. There was some discontent in the family that she didn't have to go to synagogue, that she didn't have to participate in those things. And now when we look at her youngest child with the different definition of family and connection, I did find some citations that are saying that could possibly be attributed to that lack of connection with Jewish faith or community. Once again, it's very hard to find academic sources about this too, not just because I'm looking for things within the last 7 years, but also because a lot of this information comes from people with a vested interest in the Jewish community that are doing this research. So a lot of it is religious documents. It's things coming out of like think tanks. We're not talking about peer-reviewed pieces of academic journals for this. I think it's also very important to note that the youngest daughter also hesitated with celebrating holidays such as Passover, Hanukkah. I mean, Passover is the biggest one, of course. And then her children did not celebrate. They had some token presents, but they didn't run for Hanukkah because of the Christmas parallel. But then there were some issues with Easter and Passover, and her kids basically ended up, according to her and according to them, with her youngest anyway, with a lack of cultural and family tradition around those things. They sort of felt adrift, and there was a lot of pressure from the paternal grandmother to try to assume some of those traditions from a Christian perspective. So I think there definitely is some interfaith issues. There are the literature is stating that as more recently, like within the last 5 years, I believe, the Jewish community in the United States is tending to gravitate towards coming back a little bit in terms of being more traditional, which is a big switch from what had happened earlier. But it's really challenging to find trends in this family because we've got, of the 4 siblings, everyone is divorced. One is remarried. So there's a lot of, and then there's significant partnering for everyone else as well. So there's lots of disruption to the family environment as well. So I would really hesitate to say that this definition of family that's smaller is a result of a lack of Jewish family structure or social structure around those holidays. I think it could contribute to part of it, absolutely. But I think much more than this, we have we also have another interesting thing before I move on from this, is each of the families, the 4 sisters, the mom and the dad, the women in the families all run the household. However, they defer to the men in the house, with the exception of if it's associated with someone else's well-being, particularly a child. So I found that very interesting, that was a common thread through the sisters. And the youngest sibling has no, the three older siblings recall mom and dad's relationship as dad, running the show, working outside of the house, taking care of things, mom wanting to go back to school, wanting to do different things, start a business, and dad saying no. The youngest sibling has a very different memory of that, of mom being home, being content being home, having a cottage industry that she was running out of the house, employing local people to be part of that business. So to her recollection, it was not a compromise or a settling. And to actually all three of the other sisters, it very much was, in their minds, the idea of dad was policing mom and limiting what she could do. And then all of the women are in relationships where they defer on some level to the husbands, with the exception of the youngest, who has always been in a situation where she has been fully and completely in charge of the household. And when we look at her child, this is where I think we may be beginning to look at perhaps some issues with divorce and mental illness in this generation, in her experience, that I'm not sure is representative of a family trend overall. But we have a young person here. She's just turned 18. She's still living at home. Mom and dad are divorced. The relationship that she has with dad is one of, it's a strained, obligatory relationship. That's how she defined it. She sees him because she has to. The relationship that she has with his mother, her grandmother, is very tumultuous. She does not enjoy spending time with her at all, does not want to spend time with her, is resistant and hateful of comparisons that are made between her and both her father and her grandmother. Interesting to note, when she was defining family, the first generation, the earliest generation, was she and her sister. Then it went to her mom, her dad, and her mom's current boyfriend. And then the third generation was her dad's mother. And that was it. She didn't have any of the four sisters. She didn't have any of the grandparents on her mother's side. Most people just weren't relevant to her. The only really loving and close relationship that this young woman defines is with her sister, who has just moved out of the house. She's also identifying very close allegiances with her mother and her older sister, and saying that she feels like her mother wants a closer relationship with her, with the subject, but she doesn't need that or want it, really. She was also very ambiguous about defining her mother and her mother's live-in boyfriend's relationship. She said she just didn't know what it was and didn't feel like it was in her business, really. So lots of things that I've been finding that are talking about her generation's lack of emphasis on traditional family generations, full of self-reliance, full of researching and finding the things that they need because they are the first generation that is truly fully technology immersed. They don't remember a time without devices to be able to find things. So it's very easy for them to research and find definitions and basically create a reality that works. So one family, it's very hard to find trends within the generations. This is also a big argument for not having therapy with your friends. This family is actually my best friend is the fourth sister, and her youngest child is the other, and then her eldest sister, who I also know relatively well. So it's hard to be objective also looking at this. And there are a lot of, there's lots of mental illness scattered into here. There's lots of resiliency. There's also lots of helping professions in the family, which there are some theories that could be kicked around from post-Holocaust trauma, and the idea of wanting to find ways to give back to the community and be of service, and also assuaging some guilt. None of these family members would identify that that's something that they are experiencing or feeling, though, either. So I'm limited, frankly. The literature review, it's very hard for me to look at this family systemically, because of how disjointed the youngest sibling presented her relationship and defined the members of her family. I'm stuck there, wanting to really explore that with her. And also, as opposed to that being indicative of the overall family structure, I think it could be very indicative of the fact that, her father has significant mental illness, as does her grandmother, and there's very dysfunctional stuff in the immediate household, and that's become her whole world, as opposed to being connected with the overall family structure, where there's a lot of positive support and people that are there to who I know firsthand love her very much, and she really feels no need or purpose for those relationships. So, okay, thank you.